I took a risk, and that's another big element of being successful. You've got to take risks. And I promise you, life will come up to support you in every way.
Today on Time to Discuss, I have Roger Leslie with me. Roger, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, Roger, this is kind of a cool story. So, you are an author, and you originally went to college for education, if I remember correctly, and it kind of all got jostled up a little bit. So, let's talk about your journey from going to school for something that you knew you wanted to do, how that kind of changed, and how you got on the right track. This is going to be a great story. So, I'll let you lead. How did that all begin for you?
So I knew from the time I was 13 years old that I wanted to be a writer. I just got the inspiration. I thought, this is it. This is how I'm going to make my mark in the world. I didn't know any writers. I wasn't related to anybody who was a writer. So I didn't have any mentors. I just thought, this is what I'm going to do. And I had no idea how to make a living as a writer. I just felt the inspiration. I thought, that's what I'm going to do. So I started writing from the time I was in 8th grade and wrote semi-consistently throughout my middle school and high school years. I was determined to be a writer, so I went to college as an English major. And I was pretty well into my first a year or two when I was working at a grocery store. And a customer that I saw regularly was very friendly, and he just asked me, he said, "Well, are you in college?" I said, "Yes." He said, "What are you studying?" And I was just so excited, so proud. I said, "I'm going to be an author." And he meant no malice, but serious as he can be, he looked at me and he said, "You know, you can't make a living being a writer." And I didn't know. It never occurred to me that I couldn't. It wasn't even on my radar at all. I just thought, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to learn it, I'm going to succeed. So I went to my school counselor at the university, and the career counselor, and he said, "Well, why don't you take some education courses, and instead of being an English major, be an English education major, and that way you've got a backup plan." Well, naive as I was, I thought, okay, well, I will be a teacher for about 3 years, make enough money to get myself launched, and then from there, I'll just be an author full time. Well, of course, that wasn't exactly how it worked, but I had the passion and I wanted to be the author of my dreams. And so I just changed my major and became a teacher and continued to write along the way.
I've spoken to several writers at this point, and either it's something they do as but I'm going to say a hobby for lack of better words. It's not their main occupation. So spoiler alert: can you make a living being a writer?
There are some people who can make a living being a writer. Yes, absolutely. So if anybody who's listening or watching, that's your dream, by all means, absolutely, it can be done. It's kind of like being an Oscar winner. It's rare. It takes certain elements that fall into place together. But I am a strong believer that if you're following your destiny, if this which is what you want to do, I believe life will help you move in that direction to get exactly what you want. And sometimes in doing that, it'll send you what I call onto fateful detours. So here's mine. It's a famous story, but I love to repeat it because I think it's life-changing. So I was a teacher. I loved being a teacher. I had no idea until I got into the classroom how much I would love it. In fact, I love it so much that all these years later, my next book that will be coming out next May, is a book that I wrote paying tribute to some of the students who made such an impact on my life all these years later. So I loved being a teacher, but my dream was always to be a writer. And so I used to teach my students about goal setting, and I told them my dream was to be a writer. And I taught my students how to set goals, and we would set personal goals and discuss them. And mine was always related to getting published. So I was trying and trying, and my idea was always, I want to write fiction. I want to be a fiction writer because my favorite writing was always fiction. And so I was a teacher, and there got to a point where I was kind of burning out being a classroom teacher, and I didn't really know what to do. So I decided, I'm going to amp up my writing career. So I got a master's degree in creative writing. I thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to learn. I wanted to learn everything I could to be the best I could. Well, when I finished that creative writing degree, I thought, okay, that's it. No more school. I'm done with higher education. I'm going to dedicate my evenings and weekends to just writing and getting published because, for the last 2 or 3 years, all my time was used up on that next degree. So the very week I get my degree, the librarian at my school decides to retire. And I received a phone call in my classroom from my department chair. And she said, Roger, the principal asked me, did I recommend anybody from our department who I think would be a great librarian? She said, I have no idea why, but your name just popped right out of my mouth. Well, I've had enough experience with spirituality and serendipity that I thought, okay, this is no accident, but I don't want to go back to school. And to be a librarian, I would have to go back to school. So I thought, okay, I'll meet with the principal, tell him I'm not interested. I met with the principal and I told him immediately, my dream is to be a writer. I don't want to have to go back to school to become a librarian. He said, you realize that if you become a librarian, you won't be grading papers in the evenings all the time. So you'll have more time to write. I thought, hmm. And then he said, do you have a master's degree already? And I had just gotten the degree. And I said, well, yes, I do. He said, I think I can put you on emergency certification. Let me check with the administration building to see if I can get you that certification. If so, you could have the job right now and you have 18 months to get the next degree. So I thought, okay, I'll at least sleep on it and think it over. So I went home that night and being a prayerful kind of guy, I said, God, you're not listening to me. I do not want to go back to school. I want to be a writer. I'm going to be an author. That's my destiny. So after I thought about it some more, I thought, okay, here's what I'll do. If the principal offers me the job immediately and said that everything fell into place and I can have it, it just feels so natural that it would happen like this that I don't understand why, but I'll say yes. And if it turns out that I can't get the emergency certification, I've got my answer. Lo and behold, I saw the principal. He said, yes, you can have the job immediately. So I accepted it, which of course required me to go back to school, which I did not want to do. I go back to school. I enrolled at University of Houston at Clear Lake. At the time, the library science program was run by two women, Maureen and Patricia. I know them. They're my friends now. So I call them by their first name. So Maureen taught my children's literature class. Had to write 50 reviews of children's books. She read them and she said, I really like your reviews. Why don't you pick a few out? I'll send them to Booklist to see if I can get you on staff at Booklist. Well, for those people who don't know, Booklist is published by the American Library Association. It is one of the most prestigious journals in the country for people who like to read. The people who write those reviews get a byline in several places each issue. I gave her the reviews I thought were good. That was in the fall. Never heard anything. In February, there's a box at my front door. I open the box. It's filled with galley proofs of books with a letter that says, welcome to Booklist. Here's how long your reviews need to be. Here's your deadline for turning them in. Here's how much you get paid. No interview, no forms to fill out, nothing. So automatically, by going back to school, which I did not want to do, I was getting published with a byline 6 or 7 times every 2 weeks in one of the most prestigious journals in the country. It gets better. Dr. Wilson stopped me after class one day and she said, I had written a book years ago about library programming. The publisher wants me to write a new version. I told them it was too much work for me to do by myself. Would you be interested in co-authoring a book with me? I thought, wow. I said, okay. We sat down. The first day of the meeting, turns out her background was in elementary education. Mine was in secondary. Turns out by the next week, we had a contract for a 3-book deal with Libraries Unlimited, which is one of the most prestigious publishing houses in the country. So up to that point, I had very few things published, nothing impressive. My career wasn't taking off at all. Because I accepted that fateful detour and I met Dr. White and Dr. Wilson, all of a sudden, bam, my career took off. And from there on in, I've had one success after another to the point where now I have 20 published books out and several more on the way.
Roger, that is just an awesome story. My brother had this expression, and I'll have to see if I can conjure it up real quick. But it's when the universe knocks, if you don't answer, it knocks louder. It's something along those lines. And that kind of reminds me, it didn't have to knock too loudly before you finally answered, but it started to ramp up a little bit. So did you end up getting your second degree, or did you not have to do that because you end up having all this opportunity for writing?
I did get that second degree, and it turned out that I was able to stay in the library long enough to retire so that once I reached that magic number where I could retire from public education, I immediately retired. My birthday and that date ended up the same month. It's just like, okay, I'm out. And from since then, I've been writing full time, and that's been 10 years now.
Roger, that is just awesome. That is a huge feather in your cap. I love that. I love that story. That is just amazing, and it's very inspiring for anyone that's looking to be an author. Let me ask you this: I've spoken with two different authors whose names I'm going to mention. Aubrey Andrus is a children's book author, and Alex Beaumont. She actually just had a book release earlier this week. We are recording this in August. By the time this video goes out, it'll be December. But she had a book just released, and they both had experience with, I believe both of them are creative writing. And I asked them both this question: how important was having that degree in being able to write?
The degree itself might have helped me get that Booklist job and might have made an impression on some of the big publishing houses who have published some of my books. But more than anything, it gave me more confidence. I don't know if I share this with all authors, but I know many authors have that nagging doubt. It's just like this happened to me even just recently, just this past week. So I'm working on a series of novels that I've been working on since 2010. So this has been a long process. And I finally sent the first one. I wrote all the first draft of all four novels before I revised the first one and sent it to my editor. And my editor just wrote me back this week. She loved it. She gave me some great feedback. It was wonderful. But I confessed to her, I said, there's part of me that the longer I worked on this and the deeper I was in it, the more I got scared. Like, what happens if this whole thing just tanks? What happens if my editor says, wow, Roger, you really missed the mark on this one? So the degree for me helped give me the confidence before I had these big publishing successes to convince me. One of the frustrations that many writers have early in their careers is we get rejection notices that usually don't provide any feedback. So I would never know how to read those. It's like, well, did you reject it because it wasn't any good? I don't have any talent. It just wasn't a good fit for your publishing house. There's very little feedback. It wasn't until I was interviewing with some agents where one of them gave me the advice. He said, Roger, you do have talent. I don't think this book that you shared with me is going to be published. Set it aside, chalk it up for experience, and start your next one. Although it was disheartening because I was hoping that would be my first published book, it gave me some concrete feedback. So more than anything, I think the degree confirmed for me, okay, I'm doing everything I know to do to become as good a writer as I can, and the rest of it, I'm just going to have to leave it up to destiny and see where it takes me.
That's interesting bringing up the rejections. It kind of reminds me, again, when I was speaking with Aubrey, we talked about ghostwriting. And one of the questions I posed to her, I said, how does it feel when you put all this time and energy into ghostwriting a manuscript or book, or I don't know what the correct terminology is, but when you're ghostwriting and then the contract stipulates that your name can't be part of it, what does that do to your ego? So similarly, when you're getting these rejection notices, what does that do to your ego? How do you cope with that? How do you find a way to just, pick yourself up off the floor, brush yourself off before getting thrown back to the floor again?
Getting feedback is helpful. So especially when authors are pretty new to the process, it's always great to become involved with a writing group. Now you can do it online, so they can be anywhere, but very often there are those in your local area, and belong to, join the critique group. Usually the people in the critique group are just starting out too. And so you're getting feedback from people who are about at the same level of talent and experience as you are. That kind of feedback can be very helpful. It also helps you kind of get a thicker skin because, of course, one of the scary things is you have to get up there and read in front of these people you don't know or don't know very well yet. And then you just stand there and wait for them to give you feedback. And it's, it can be very daunting. But belonging to a discussion group like that or a critique group can be very helpful because without feedback early on, it's hard to gauge, am I getting better? Am I getting good enough to get published? You know, there are some people who just, stack up their rejection notices like, as verifications like, yes, this is proof that I can't write. Others, it's like this is proof that I'm really trying to have a career here. But without feedback, those rejections aren't really, to me, aren't very helpful. I need feedback with from someone. And the advice I give my writing students, because I teach writing classes and independently, and I coach people through the writing process. The advice I usually give is if one person has an issue with something in the book, take it with a grain of salt, consider it. But if multiple people, multiple readers are sharing the same concern, that's probably something worth looking at and revising in your manuscript.
Okay, that's good information. So if someone is looking to just get started, or they're thinking about they want to be a writer, when they enter the professional world, what do you think is the best course of action for them? Should they go to school to study English? Should they just study whatever passion they have and then just focus on the writing on the side? From your experience or your opinion, what do you think is the best approach for someone that wants to be a writer?
I think it depends on the person. There are some people who could really benefit from having more education. There are others that it's just innate in them and they need to just learn how to dig deep enough into their subconscious and let that first draft come out through them. I A recent book that I wrote is called From Inspiration to Publication, and it gives the tips on how do you become a writer. And it takes them from the whole process of how do you start, what do you think about, all the way to what are some of your publishing options. So that might be a good starting point. And it's always good, the number one criteria I think is be a reader. Writers are readers. So the more you read, the more it just seeps into your subconscious, the writing style. When people start writing, they discover that they use words or phrases that they didn't even know they knew. And that's because you're digging deeper than your conscious level thoughts. You're going into your subconscious, and everything that you experience ends up being recorded in your subconscious. So when you're in the first draft writing process, those things just come through you. And sometimes you will marvel at how brilliant you are. There are times you'll read that same passage and think, boy, I thought that was really good. Now I think this is really terrible. But conversely, there will be things you thought, in my first draft, I was like, that's just fair. And then you reread it and you think, wow, that's pretty deep. That's pretty good. So it's, just let your subconscious do what it needs to do in writing that first draft, and you will be shocked at what you produce.
I love that. That is really, really cool. It reminds me of this one time. So I went to school for music, among other things. I was a bass player, and I remember listening to a recording of a band playing, and it was I think it was a jazz bit, like a three-piece combo or something like that. And I'm listening to, I'm like, man, that bass player sounds really good. And then I had the realization a couple moments later. I was like, wait a minute, that's me. And all of a sudden, I was like, not that good.
That is
So
so exciting, though. Yes,
it really
yes.
is. It really is. I hear what you're saying, how, you read more, you might, start to realize the genius inside of you. That's really, really cool.
Yes.
Um, Earlier you talked about a publicist. So at what point did you start to realize that a publicist could benefit you? How did that relationship begin?
I have been published multiple ways. I've been published through some of the large traditional publishing houses. I've been published traditionally through some medium and small presses. And then I started my own publishing house, and I've been publishing some of my own books as well. It depends on the subject. I write in multiple genres, fiction and nonfiction. So if there's a book that I write that fits into my mission statement, and my mission is to inspire people to live the life they dream and to empower them to follow their own unique spiritual path, if a book that I write fits that mission, then very often I like to publish it through my own publishing house. And that's where the idea of a publicist really came in, because if you, like any small business or any independent business, you wear so many hats that's so demanding. And I really want to spend my time writing. And so I realized that I wanted to hire people who could do the things that I'm not that interested in doing, but I know need to be done. And of course, because it's their job, they know it much better than I do, and they do it better than I could on my own.
So at what point did you actually have that realization from the business side of things, where it was like, did you initially start doing things and you're like, ah, this is way too deep for me, or you're like right off the bat you said, you know what, marketing, not interested, I'm going to mess this up, I'm going to pay someone to do it. How did those business parts kind of get offloaded to other people?
So when I first started my own publishing business, I was just a one-man band. Just like, okay, I'm going to learn this. I'll go to this conference and learn this, and I'll start doing this. And I kept doing and doing and doing. And at first it was fun. It was new and it was different, and I had never done it before. So it was very exciting. Over time, it became cumbersome and overwhelming. And I just thought, okay, if I'm going to live the life I dream and be the writer that I want to be and be as prolific as I want to be, I need to spend more time writing and less time doing all these other skills that are required to be successful. That's when I thought, okay, I need somebody who's on my team who can help support me in this and let me do the writing while he or she does the marketing and sets up interviews like this or does the social media promotions. I do all of some of it, but most of it I entrust my team to do, and they do a great job.
So you said before that you like to write both fiction and nonfiction. Which what do you prefer to write, or what comes most natural to you?
There's an element of selflessness that comes in achieving a dream, and that's where I learned about nonfiction writing. So my dream was always just to write fiction. That's all I cared about doing. That's what I'm passionate about. And I assumed that writing nonfiction did not require that much creativity. So while I was teaching, a friend of mine who lived in the neighborhood where I was teaching had compiled a bunch of notes. She wanted to do something for this community where she grew up. And at this time, I had not had any books published yet, so I was still in my 20s. And she knew I wanted to be a writer, and so she said, "You know, I've written a book, I put together a book, and I wonder, would you edit it for me?" Well, I was very clear and strict about my writing schedule, but I thought, let me do something loving for a friend. Let me do something selfless. So I thought, I'll interrupt for, my schedule for a couple weeks maybe, and just edit this, just use my writing time to edit her manuscript. Well, when I started editing the manuscript, I just got all these creative ideas of how I could make it better because in some cases she had multiple interviews by different people, but they were all pretty much saying the same thing. And I thought, wow, I could streamline this and I could do this. And what happens if we hooked everything together with a centralizing theme? And I just had all these ideas. And so I took a risk, and that's another big element of being successful. You've got to take risks. But I took a risk and I just wrote a little section of the book. And then I presented it to her and I said, I know you just wanted me to edit what you had, but I think I have an idea for something that could be a really stellar book if you would let me do it. And I showed it to her. She accepted it so graciously. And she said, yes, I really want something wonderful for the community where I grew up. And she let me do it. And it took me 9 months to put that book together, but that ended up being my first published book. It was a book about Galena Park, the community where I taught in the Houston area. And that's when I learned that writing nonfiction is easier for me than writing fiction. It's a much faster process, but it also requires a great deal of creativity. So I like the balance. Whatever I'm inspired to write, that's what I want to write. I had an agent once who told me, Roger, you do so many different things, I have no idea how to market you. But that's when I realized that's what makes me different from most other people. I write in so many different genres of fiction and nonfiction that I could help so many people. And that's why I added to my resume being a writing coach, being an editor of other people's manuscripts, and being a publisher of other people's works as well.
That is fantastic. Talking about taking risks, there was a post on one of the social media platforms that I saw the other day, and it was asking about people that are in their 40s, 50s. What advice do you have for someone that's in their 20s? And no one had responded to this. I like those threads in social media where no one is saying anything, because then I feel like you get a little more attention. So I ended up replying to the person, and among other things, I said, take more risks. Because that's the time to do it when you're in your 20s and you can really reap those rewards, having the confidence and just going all in and just seeing what happens. So I love what you're saying about taking risks. Roger, I am running a little short on time, but one thing I'd like to do is whenever I'm speaking with someone is to give them the opportunity to talk about a project they're working on, a cause they believe in. So if there's something specific you'd like to discuss, the floor is yours.
So my mission in life is to inspire people to live the life they dream and to empower them with the courage to follow their own unique spiritual path. So if anybody who's listening today is thinking, I want to follow my passion or I want to discover my passion, I encourage you now that now is the time. Not 10 years from now, not when you get enough, not when your kids get out of college, not when you get enough money together or anything else. It's like begin it now. The journey toward your goal is the real fulfillment of life. So I encourage you, take the risk, take that dive, do whatever you need to do, and say right now, this is my dream and I'm going to follow it, whatever it is. And I promise you, life will come up to support you in every way. It will send all of the resources and people you need to find the success that you dream of.
Roger, that is so inspiring. I love that. I love that. And when you first started talking about that, it reminded me of, and I'm paraphrasing this expression, but it's, it usually has to do with investment. And it's like, when should I start investing? When should I open up my IRA or something like that? And it's, the answer is like 10 years ago, but the next best time is right now.
Exactly. So now is the time. Now is when life is happening.
I love that. Roger, it's been absolutely awesome having you on Time We Discuss, and we learned what it's like to be an author.
Thank you so much. I had a blast.